What is ableism? By definition, ableism is discrimination in favor of able-bodied, mentally healthy, and neurotypical people. About 18% of the population has some level of disability. And until 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law, regulations to help and protect the persons with disabilities were virtually non-existent. In the UK, they were virtually non-existent until 1995, when the Disabilities Discrimination Act was signed into law. In 2010, the UK superseded that act with the Equalities Act. But that's not a thing. Disabled people totally aren't discriminated against. In truth, disabled people are considered a segregated minority, meaning set apart from the rest or each other, isolated or divided. Think about that for a second. Until the civil rights movement of the 1960s, people with disabilities in the US were institutionalized. The UK didn't adopt a policy of deinstitutionalization until 1983. Even President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a polio survivor, was forced to hide his disability from the public. Now, over 40 years later, people are still surprised when they see someone in a wheelchair rolling around, participating in day-to-day activities. They're even more surprised when they see someone with a cognitive disability working and contributing to wider society. When people find out that someone's got a mental illness, they assume they're either suicidal or homicidal. People assume that you can tell if someone's on the autism spectrum by looking at them. People assume that people who are deaf and in wheelchairs are also cognitively disabled, which is especially true if you're with somebody who isn't disabled. They assume that blind people are weak and helpless. And, in truth, we disabled people adapt, and we live relatively normal lives. Adaptive equipment has helped with that a lot, and made huge strides in recent decades. For example, wheelchairs. They used to be big, bulky steel contraptions that they didn't do much other than get you from point A to point B. Now wheelchairs are lightweight, stylish, and easily maneuverable. With the inventions of computers, people who are able to communicate who otherwise wouldn't be able to speak. Crossing lights beep to let the visually impaired know which way to walk and when the light's going to change. Unfortunately, these adaptations don't change people's views on disabled people. Ableism is very deeply rooted in history, and unfortunately a lot of that history is violent. But that's in the past. Nothing like that happens anymore. Actually, studies show that a disabled person is 50% more likely to be the victim of a violent crime. Institutionalized ableism. Is ableism enforced by an influential or authoritative institution? For example, the idea that neuroatypical people need to be conditioned to behave more like neurotypical people instead of teaching them how to function the way they are. Institutionalized ableism is the media hyper-focusing on the mental state of a violent criminal. It's the media enforcing the idea that life ends at disability and that we're all miserable, right? Institutionalized ableism is the fact that as I wrote this in Microsoft Word, ableism wasn't recognized as a word. For me personally, institutionalized ableism is the reason I have to call ahead to venues despite the ADA to make sure that they're actually accessible. It's the reason that when I make those calls, I have to specify what I need to know, because the person on the other end of the line has no idea what people in wheelchairs need to maneuver. And institutionalized ableism means that my city fines businesses downtown for having a ramp out on the sidewalk. I kid you not. They fine them. Doing that bars me from entering many of the one-of-a-kind stores I enjoyed before I became disabled. Now, I can't go in them unless I have some able-bodied person go in and ask them to put out the flimsy little plywood ramp so that I can go in. And you know what? They don't always have them. Segregation from the able-bodied majority of society is not something that's going to go away because of the nature of disability. There are accommodations that are completely and totally necessary for us to function in society. But what isn't necessary is for those accommodations to be set away from high traffic areas where they won't be seen, as if needing those accommodations is somehow shameful. I can't begin to tell you how many times I found the accessible, barrier-free entrance to be in the back of a building when there was plenty of room for the same accommodations at the front door. I can't think of one special education classroom that wasn't down some hallway that otherwise wouldn't be traveled. I don't understand why that's necessary. Casual ableism is a form of ableism people don't realize they're guilty of. Casual ableism is widely accepted use of what a disabled person is or is not, and what we can and cannot do. And, the majority of this falls under stereotypes. Ableism is arguably the most discredited and most prevalent form of discrimination in our society today. In this video series, What is Ableism?, I'm going to shed some light on what I and the millions of other people living with disability face on a day-to-day basis.